Boom. Keith, welcome back, man. An hour behind. I think this is the third time zone that I spoke to you in. I think you've been in Mountain Time once. Maybe I'm misremembering. Definitely on West Coast, and now you're back in the great land of Central Coast. Central Coast.
No. Actually, you're wrong. No.
You're on
I'm
Mountain Time right now?
El Paso, Texas, but El Paso is the only part of Texas that is in Mountain Time.
You're right. You're on Juarez time. You're on Juarez time. Yeah.
Yep.
It is Juarez. That's across the border, right?
That's right across the border.
Yeah. El Paso is underneath New Mexico. I always forget. Yeah.
Yeah. If you can picture what Texas looks like, it's got that tall sort of chimney, and then to the farthest western point, there's a little triangle tip. El Paso is in the actual tip of that little triangle in the western part.
So Mountain Time. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm from that chimney, right at the armpit there of New Mexico and Texas. At the I don't know if that's what you want to call it.
That sounds about right.
Mom, if you're listening, I'm sorry. We don't live in an armpit, though it is uglier than Virginia. So, but either way, welcome back to the show, Keith. It's been like over a year. It's been a while. So what is new? Obviously, you've moved to the west of the armpit of Western Texas, to the mountains of El Paso.
Yeah.
What else is new?
Well, we kind of came back to El Paso. This is where my wife Wendy and I met and got married, going to college at UT El Paso. So we kind of moved back here about a year ago to be with my mom and dad. And he just passed about a month ago. And we were just talking about that before we hit record. And so other than moving again, hopefully we're not going to move anytime soon. I've been working with a group called Peace Catalyst International. They do some work bringing Muslims and Christians together usually over a meal to focus on what we have in common, which is Jesus, ironically. And so they've been doing some great work, and we're excited about working with them. And I've just been writing books like a madman. And so I'm having this new book that came out about a month ago, Jesus Unexpected. And actually today, I think I finished writing the next one. So,
you said you didn't want to tell your publisher, and I don't know if Raf listens to these, but I feel like you just do that.
I was being facetious. Of course he knows. He'll know.
Is it also an book?
Yeah, this is so the Jesus series, there is an end in sight. So this Jesus Unexpected is number, what is this, 6? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, number 5. It's number 5. And there'll be 7 total when I'm done. So there's
is the last one name unending? Please say it's unending.
No. Come on. The one that just came out a month ago is Jesus Unexpected. That's about the end times. The one that I'm working on right now, trying to finish up right now, is Jesus Unforsaken. That's about the cross and penal substitutionary atonement theory. And then the final one in the series, hear it here first. It'll be called Jesus Unarmed. And that'll be about, Jesus and the Prince of Peace and nonviolence and all that.
You haven't started that one yet. You just finished Unforsaken.
Yeah, I just today finished. I'd say 90% of the writing is done. There's going to be there's always rewriting, go through it and do some last minute little touches, but the bulk of the writing from scratch is done.
So you're done with the Unseries for the most part.
Except for this last book, yeah. So I only have one more book to go that I need to write. But honestly, the one, Jesus Unarmed, I have been talking about this topic of Jesus and nonviolence for probably 15 years. I feel like I have answered every possible objection about 200 times.
So it's going to write itself.
I think I could write it in my sleep. I really do. So I don't think it'll be as much of a challenge. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure the book hears you right now and says challenge accepted. Let's see what you got. That was part of this. I had so many questions about how you write so fast, but I've realized, I heard N.T. Wright say on a different podcast that he talks about so many of these things so often that oftentimes he's like, I just sit down and I write. I know what I want to say. I don't really need to edit it. I know what I want to say. I'm just going to write. But I watched your Facebook post updates, and I have been trying to write for myself at a couple thousand words a week, unsuccessfully.
Mhm.
Though I don't know, there's probably 15,000 words there. I don't even know if any of them all go together, though. I'm envious, Keith,
Yeah.
envious of the things there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, part of it is, this is all I do now. For the last couple of years, I've just been focusing on nothing but writing my blogs and books and, podcasting and kind of the stuff I love to do. But, now that I've done so many of these books as well, I always do an outline, like you mentioned with NT Wright. I mean, usually I have blogged or written or spoken on the topics that I want to cover in the book enough times that I do kind of know already what I want to say. So once I outline it, I know, oh, chapter one, I'm going to talk about this, and then I'll talk about that, and then so I just kind of write it in sections, and I usually write for 2 or 3 hours at a time, because this is all I do. I'm able to focus and do that.
Yeah.
But this book, the next one that will be coming out, that we'll talk about later, about the cross, is probably this is definitely the hardest book I've ever written.
Hmm.
Because the atonement and the cross, it just feels like advanced physics compared to everything else. You know what I mean? It's just the most complicated thing to try to explain. In what way did Jesus die for my sins, and how does that, how does that actually work? Plus, with all the other stuff that kind of swirls around that topic. So that was a tough one. This is actually probably very challenging.
Huh. Yeah. Well, pastors make it look so easy when they tell you it's all about this is what it says in Mark and in Romans and in this. They make it look so easy.
Right. Well, I guess it depends on what your goal is.
Fair enough.
I'm not reading off a script. Like, I don't mean this to be. It's probably going to come across this way, but a lot of pastors, if they're denominational, there is sort of a script like this. The denomination believes this about whatever the topic is, and so all I got to do is go and grab what some of the leading scholars or authors in my stream have said about it and just repeat what they said.
Yeah.
But with my books, I'm typically wanting to challenge a lot of those ideas and kind of try to bring something totally new, if I can, to the table. And so because of that, it's never easy. There's always a lot of research that has to be done, and so yeah.
Yeah.
That's usually why I blog on these topics for usually at least a year before I even start writing a book on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get to this current book, the one that came out a
month ago.
Has it been? It's been. I was going to say a couple months. Time. COVID. I'm in a COVID time shift. Time is all relative to me
Right.
anymore. I don't know what day it is. It's
I know. What day is it? What month is it?
It's almost Christmas, and it was just Memorial Day. I don't know. I don't know what time it is.
Walmart has the Christmas decorations out already. It's not even nearly October.
I heard, and I saw a Halloween commercial the other day, but it had sleigh bells in the music. But it was advertising Halloween candy, like in bulk. Come and get it, people. Come and get it. It's on sale. But it had sleigh bells in the back. And I told my wife, I was like, this is weird. Listen to this. And I rewound it. And she's like, are those sleigh bells? I was like, yeah, I think.
Subliminal.
She's like, that's weird. Why are they here? So Jesus Unexpected, where you're basically trying to, or I would argue you do, tackle the end times. Before we talk a bit about that book, like, why do you keep kicking sacred cows? Like, why is this necessary?
Right. Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think I'm sure some people have maybe in their imagination that what I do when I sit down to write a book is say, what will really piss people off? What's something super controversial I can poke the bear? That isn't really what I do at all. I mean, what I've been doing this whole Jesus series, honestly, has been a lot of it, again, born out of my own experience. I just sort of what I've experienced is that I just want Jesus, you know what I mean? And I feel like so much of theology and the doctrines that we have and churches we know it kind of a thing, like it just sort of, and in human nature too, I don't want to just blame it on that, because it's, in the end, it's people. We just put all kinds of other things between us and Jesus that I have felt like, that's why it's Jesus I feel like we have to untangle, our faith from our politics. We have to unbind Jesus from the book, because we've gotten the Bible confused with Jesus, or Jesus confused with the Bible. We don't know the difference. So it's things like that. It's just like recognizing, hey, I think we've kind of, our vision, our awareness, our understanding of who Jesus is is a little bit off kilter, a little off focus. And so each book, what I've been trying to do is to sort of point that out to people, hopefully to say, hey, let's back up a little bit. Are we thinking about this the right way? Are we really seeing Jesus for who he really is, or are we being kind of distracted by some of these other things? So that's really bottom line, I think. Every book in the Jesus Son series is sort of tackling something that I feel like is that's kind of dangerous, that because it's distracting us, it's not allowing us to truly relate to Jesus the way that we should.
Yeah. So can we just, I'm going to be sarcastic and tongue in cheek here, but the end times, I feel like the church already knows what this is. I'm going to die. I'm going to lay in the ground for forever. And then the world's going to burn. And it's arguably, possibly my job to help it burn so that Israel can be established as a nation. Jesus can come back, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Antichrist, Tim LaHaye, Jerry B. Jenkins, bad Nikolai Carpathia and Nicolas Cage movies. And then, yay, heaven's here, right? That's the end times, correct? That's all
Pretty
of it in
much,
a nutshell.
yeah. Although, usually what I hear it described, it's not that I die and lay in the ground part of it. It's, everything else you said, yes. Usually it's any minute now, any day now. I'll be driving down the road or talking to my friend on the phone, and I'll just go, oh my gosh, look at that! There's Jesus! Oh, there he is in the clouds! Doo-doo, wow! And I'm floating in the sky! Woo! And I'm like, it's that feeling that any minute now, any day now, it's we're closer now than we've ever been before. Jesus is coming back in the sky, and he's basically going to validate how right we have been all along to everybody. See, I told you. Mm-hmm. Jesus was Lord, and you didn't believe me, and we're right. And he'll destroy all of my enemies, and he'll shame all of them in this battle of Armageddon or whatever, mm-hmm. and then establish the kingdom and then there you go.
Yeah.
And the judgment. Then it kind of gets. It depends on what version you've heard. You kind of maybe is there tribulation before that, and then that happens, or does it happen and then the tribulation happens, or but ultimately, yeah, that's the basic gist of the story. Like you said, before that can happen, we have to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. There has to be some Antichrist figure that makes a peace treaty with Israel for 6 years and then breaks it in the middle, or 7 years and then breaks it in the middle. Of that time, the 3.5 years, he has to stop the daily sacrifice, like all that stuff. And so, yeah, that's all part of what we've seen in the either A Thief in the Night or Left Behind or mm-hmm. any of those kinds of things. So you're right. People do think that they already know what that is. And so what I try and do in the book is to let Christians know, first of all, and in fact, that's the first thing I do is say, by the way, that whole thing, that mm-hmm. whole story, that whole thing you think, I even had someone tell me this, that we act as if that story, that version of the second coming in the end times was handed to us by the apostles. But it wasn't. It was actually handed to us by a guy named John Nelson Darby in 1830. And it didn't become popular until 1850. And then because of things like the Schofield Reference Bible and D.L. Moody, and then later Dallas Theological Seminary and Talbot and some of these other Bible schools that were reinforcing and now teaching this end times rapture doctrine, lo and behold, it became, in America especially, it became the only way to think of that end times second coming story. But what that means is that for 1,830 years or 29 years, that's not the way Christians thought about that. That's not the way they read those kinds of scriptures, like Daniel or the Olivet Discourse or even Revelation. So that's the first thing. I just want to educate Christians that, hey, by the way, it hasn't always been this way. It's very relatively new. And it actually doesn't come from very good, I would say it doesn't come from very good biblical scholarship.
Yeah. So I want to back up because we used a lot of words there, like tribulation, rapture. I think you used the word dispensationalism. And if you didn't, I'm going to.
Sure.
You used Olivet Discourse, Daniel 7, which isn't a big word. It's just a chapter in the Bible. But I'd like to kind of, and Darby as well. And in full disclosure, I can remember the day that I decided to go to Liberty. Although I don't think my family was happy that I went to Liberty, because I left Texas and then never went home. I can remember my dad gave me a red leather bound Schofield study Bible, which actually it's right here I still read it. I enjoy it. It's still the Bible. It's all marked up and highlighted, and I don't read it as often as some other versions that I have, but I didn't realize who Darby was until I read, I want to say it was Benjamin Corey's book Unafraid, and he had like 2 sentences in there about Darby as a passing thing, like obviously everybody knows this. And ever since then, I've flirted around a little education of Darby. I had no idea his impact on Schofield or Schofield's impact on me and or my dad and the whole continent of North America. So when you say dispensationalism, for those that are unfamiliar with that, or maybe they are already living underneath a belief of that and they just didn't know that it was called that. Tribulation, there's post-tribulation, pre-tribulation. Can you just in brief say, when we say dispensationalism, here's what that means and why that matters, and then maybe tackle some of those terms?
So let's do that. Let's walk through some of that. So you're right. The strangest thing about dispensationalism, the teaching, is that I have flat out had conversations with Christians where we'll talk about dispensationalism, or I'll bring it, someone will bring it up, or maybe I'll bring it up, and the other Christian that I'm talking to will say, "What's dispensationalism? I've never even heard of that. I don't believe that." And then when I say, "Well, do you believe that there's going to be, before Jesus can return, there's going to be this Antichrist figure?" Yeah. Do you believe that there's going to be this rapture where we're all going to be caught up into the air? And yeah. Do you believe that the temple in Jerusalem has to be rebuilt before Jesus can come back? Yeah. You're a dispensationalist. So people hold dispensational beliefs, but quite often have no idea that that's what it is.
Right.
In other words, they don't call it dispensationalism. They actually just call it Christianity, because that's the way they've been told. Like, again, they just assume the apostles came straight from them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, that is where, so these are ideas that John Nelson Darby introduced and popularized into the Christian church. Again, like in 1830, 1850, by the time it kind of took off. So that's one. And again, dispensationalism is more than just that end times rapture theology. There are other things to dispensationalism where it talks about how God deals with mankind throughout history through these different dispensations. That in the Old Testament, that was one dispensation. The New Testament is a different dispensation. But in my book, I don't deal with that, because what I'm mainly concerned about is the end times part of that, story. So I just narrowly focus on the end times rapture stuff that we bought into through Darby's influence.
Yeah.
So what other terms do you think we should?
So we've got tribulation, which, unless I'm wrong, is just a period of time that we're all just going to suffer, correct? Like everyone else got raptured up and everyone left over on the phone watching people fly up into the sky. They're in for a world of hurt. Yeah.
So real quick on the tribulation thing, again, this is something that comes from a misreading, I believe, of the Olivet Discourse and some other prophetic biblical prophecies in the New Testament. But it's the belief that, the tribulation is basically a really bad time for, and so again, there's pre and mid and post. So there's different arguments. Christians disagree on whether or not there will be a rapture before this horrible time, meaning the Christians get to escape. And then in that case, the tribulation would be for people that were pretend Christians. They thought they were Christians, but they weren't really Christians. Mm-hmm. So they're going to suffer through the tribulation. If it's mid-tribulation, then real Christians will suffer through some of the tribulation, but about midway through the tribulation, then Jesus comes back and they're pulled out of it, and then it would continue with the pseudo-Christians. And then the post-tribulation would be Christians go through the entire horrible season of basically intense persecution, torture, death, horrible, horrible things happening to them under the hand of the Antichrist and the beast. And then at the end of that, and only when it's over, then Jesus raptures us or takes us out of that. And then, of course, brings the hammer down and Armageddon. So,
Yeah. I want to define Antichrist, but I have a whole different line of questioning for that. So I'm going to wait for that.
Let's do that. You're right. That's a special thing.
So the other one is the rapture. So I think it's inherently baked into the bread that you and I take at communion when we go to church, that the rapture is a predetermined thing. Can you give kind of the history of the rapture because from what I understand, from what I've read, not only of you, but from many others, is rapture is a new thing. Like rapture was never a thing. Jesus didn't seem to believe in the rapture. Paul didn't seem to believe in the rapture. Athanasius, in a rapture. Like, so what's like, why is it a thing? Like, and how did we get to
Yeah.
it being a thing?
Yeah, so well, we really do. That's probably one of the main things we can pin on John Nelson Darby. That idea of this rapture, this pre-tribulation rapture, this second coming rapture of Christ, or end times rapture of Christ, who would come and rapture us, pull us out. So yes, it is a new. It was a relatively new thing. Darby was the one that kind of connected these dots in the scriptures, and mainly the main, if we could point to one main scripture verse that seems to support that view, is First Thessalonians chapters 4 and 5, where Paul uses language that sounds like, we talks about we'll be caught up in the air to meet Jesus. But and I don't know if you want to get into that specifically now deeply, because but to do that, I need to talk a little bit about the Olivet Discourse.
Okay, sure.
That. Is that okay?
Sure. Let's go. Yeah, let's dive in deep.
Let's jump in. Okay.
Let's go.
So let's just put a pin in First Thessalonians, because again, that's the Bible verse, really the only Bible verse that sort of suggests that we're going to be literally sort of vacuumed up into the sky, and fly into the sky to meet Jesus. So again, we'll come back to that in a second. So in the New Testament, sort of from Jesus, there's what's called the Olivet Discourse, and it's because Jesus gives this sort of prophetic warning, and a very long prophetic it's a prophecy. Jesus has a prophet prophesy something on the Mount of Olives. Now it's in Matthew 24 most famously, but it's also paralleled in Mark and in Luke. And actually, a great thing you can do is to, if you can find a way to do this, put all three side by side, Matthew 24, the Mark and the Luke side by side, because there's large chunks of it that are almost verbatim exactly the same, but the places where they slightly differ, where one gives a little bit different information than the other one, can also be really instructive and very helpful. So that was actually something that really helped me in my study. But anyway, let's just go back. The Olivet Discourse, what Darby and end times futurists will tell us is that what Jesus is describing in Matthew 24 in the Olivet Discourse is the end of the world, and the signs that we need to be looking for Jesus to return in the sky and take us all away, okay? So the problem is that if you actually go and read Matthew 24, read the Olivet Discourse, this is how it begins. Jesus and the disciples are walking out of the temple in Jerusalem. The disciples stop and marvel at this building, and they say, Jesus, have you ever seen anything more amazing? Isn't this the most magnificent building you've ever seen? Wow, what an amazing temple. And Jesus' response to that is to say, a time is coming very soon when not one of these stones of this temple will be left upon another, but every one of them will be thrown to the ground. And this shocks the hell out of them, and they're like, wait, whoa, time out. What? Well, Jesus, what is the sign of that? What will be the sign of that happening, of this destruction of the temple you're talking about, that you're saying is going to happen very, very soon? Then they walk up to the Mount of Olives, and then Jesus tells them, he answers that question. These are the signs of when that temple will be destroyed. Now, that temple was destroyed in about 40 years from when he said this. And so when Jesus in that message says, some of you standing here will not taste death before everything I have told you comes to pass, he is not lying. He's telling the truth. Many of them, again, this was within their lifetime. 40 years later, that temple was destroyed, and it was destroyed prophetically the way he said it was. And so, again, it's not a prophecy about the end of the world. It is a prophecy, Jesus says, about the end of the age. But the end of the age is not the end of the world. It was the end of the Jewish age, which is actually something that Daniel sort of gives us a heads up in Daniel 9 and other chapters of Daniel, where Daniel will prophesy about, that God speaks to him about the end of the Jewish age, the end of the times of the Jews. And so this is exactly the same thing Jesus is prophesying. It's the end of the age, the end of the Jewish age. And it's his coming, but it's not his coming the way that dispensationalists and Darby has told us it is, okay? We hear when we read those kinds of scriptures where it talks about Jesus coming, or, when Jesus tells the high priest, for example, right before his crucifixion, you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. Well, he did, but what he saw was not Jesus on a horse in the sky riding in the clouds, literally. What he saw, however, coming in the clouds was the same exact coming in the clouds that Jeremiah meant, and Isaiah and Ezekiel and other Old Testament prophets. When they talked about God coming against Babylon or Egypt or Edom or even Jerusalem, it's a coming in judgment. In other words, God warned you. He asked you that if you didn't stop doing, following this direction, this path, that destruction would come upon you. And because you didn't listen, now the destruction is coming. And the way it's described as is God coming in the clouds. Jesus uses that same language, that he is coming. But it's not, again, it's not good news. It's not, yay, he's coming. It's in more of the sense, even as the way Jesus means it in the book of Revelation. At the beginning of the book of Revelation, when he speaks to the 7 churches, he commends each of those 7 churches for something they're doing great. And he blesses them. But then whenever he calls out something that he feels like they're doing wrong and he sort of rebukes them, his warning to them, his warning is that if you don't stop, I'm going to come to you. That's not a reward. I'm going to come to you and remove your lampstand. So again, they understood that coming of the Lord, that coming in the clouds, was not a rapture, yay, here we go to heaven kind of coming. It was a coming in very much in the sense of this apocalyptic hyperbole, again, used all through the Old Testament. Jesus repeats it when he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem that's coming in 40 years at 70 AD. And so if we understand that that's what he's saying, that that's what's being discussed, that it's not a discussion about the end of the world, it's not a discussion about the physical return of Jesus in the sky. If we read it properly, I would say, then it all makes sense. And then it everything Jesus says was going to happen actually did happen, and actually in some pretty astounding ways when you look at actually how it was fulfilled in AD 70.
Yeah. How would someone, myself included, read Old Testament and I guess New Testament prophecy in a deprogrammed way? Because the way, and you referenced it in your book, you say one of the main outcomes, well, let me ask you, is it all right if I quote your book, Keith?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
One of the main outcomes of Darby's theology has been the tendency to apply current events to biblical prophecies in the hopes of determining the date of the second coming of Christ and the end of the world. And mixed in that would also be the rapture and everything else. So I don't think most people know how to read the Old Testament prophecies and prophets without reading it that way. And so with apocalyptic literature, with the word apocalypse literally just meaning like a revealing, like I use a metaphor that I heard the other day, like, turkey dinner at Thanksgiving. If it's underneath the thing, look, I apocalyptic dinner. Here's the turkey. Look what we've done. It's an apocalypse for you. But most people don't understand the word that way. And it has a different nomenclature in the world that we live in, the same way that Snapchat is a thing that means something in the world that we live in. It has a different nomenclature than those two words should. So how do we begin reading those? Like, so say someone's listening and they're like, yeah, I'm not going to go buy the book, but I do kind of want to engage in this. Like, how do you do that?
Well, okay. So here's what I would say. And you don't have to buy the book, because I think actually you could literally on your own do a study and you could see what I'm talking about.
They should buy the book. All of them.
They should. Come on. It makes so much more sense.
I know people are lazy, and sometimes I am. So.
But you know what though? Listen, I would say very respectfully, if there's somebody who's like, look, Keith, I study the Bible. I don't need to buy your book. So, I mean, that's fine. I would just say to that person, but I do this in the book. I point this out in the book. I give very specific examples in the book. So that's why it would help you if you did read it. So for example, when Jesus uses, it's called apocalyptic hyperbole. So when Jesus in Matthew 24 in the Olivet Discourse, when he uses phrases like the sun will not give its light and the stars will fall from the sky and there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth and there'll be tribulation such as never been since the time of the beginning until the end, nor ever shall there be again, and all this kind of language, which if we don't recognize the fact that this is apocalyptic hyperbole, and in fact, if we haven't noticed that what Jesus is doing when he uses that language is that he's quoting verbatim from Jeremiah, from Isaiah, from Ezekiel, from these Old Testament prophets. And when they used those same exact phrases to talk about how, the destruction that was going to come upon Babylon or Egypt or Edom or Jerusalem, again, it was never literal. You know what I mean? So they talk about like the smoke of the fire of your destruction rises forever and ever. That's one of the things that happens in the Old Testament when they're talking about the destruction of Edom. Well, no, if you go to Edom today, which is basically Syria, no, you're not going to see eternal smoke going up forever. I mean, maybe from a recent conflict, but not from that one back, 6,000 years ago.
Yes.
So part of it is that, like, so in other words, like most of the time, I think most of us, if we were reading Isaiah, if we were reading Jeremiah, okay, let's say we're doing a Bible study in Jeremiah, and we read this part where God was warning the people of Babylon about something. And he warned them, and then he said, if you don't do this, these horrible things are going to happen to them. And then we read that these destructions happened. We wouldn't go, oh man, let's check the news. Let me turn on CNN and see if Babylon's in trouble. Like if any of these prophecies here in Isaiah are going to happen to Babylon tomorrow. No, because we understand that was a long time ago, and that nation doesn't exist anymore. But we would read it and go, oh yeah, so God's, the prophet's using this very flowery apocalyptic language. He's overstating the magnitude of this destruction. But we would get it. We would kind of go, oh, yeah, okay, this is how it was fulfilled back then. But the problem is, see, with the New Testament, if we don't recognize Jesus is using the exact same language, he's talking about the exact same thing they were. He's warning people in Jerusalem that this kind of destruction is going to come upon you. It's not the end of the world, but it will be the end of their world. The world as they know it will cease to be. But the thing that I think that makes it additionally challenging for us when we read the New Testament prophecies like that, like the Olivet Discourse, is that we do not have within the New Testament, we can't turn the page or turn to another book in the New Testament and read, and this is how, the Romans surrounded Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, and step by step, here's exactly what happened throughout that process. And then we could connect the dots and go, oh, wow, look at that. Look what happened here and when Jerusalem was destroyed. That reminds me of what Jesus said was going to happen over here in Matthew 24. And so actually that's one thing I do in the book. I go through the, Josephus was a historian who lived during the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. And he's a Jewish historian, not a Christian, probably not even aware of anything Jesus prophesied in the Olivet Discourse. He's just reporting the way the destruction of Jerusalem happened. And there are parallels. There are some pretty amazing, pretty astounding things that he mentions in that destruction of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
But again, because it's not in my Bible, it sort of leaves that story hanging. It leaves it open to us to say, well, the stars haven't fallen from the sky yet. The heavens have not been rolled back like a scroll yet. I guess, the moon hasn't turned to blood and the sun hasn't stopped giving its light, and all these sound like world-ending things. Well, these haven't happened yet. So I guess all that stuff Jesus was talking about in Matthew 24, I guess it hasn't happened yet. And then so, again, that sort of leaves us vulnerable to someone like Darby or anybody else, really.
Yeah.
Any other sort of Bible prophecy teacher who wants to say, well, this is perfectly what's happening right now in Jerusalem. Because we don't know that it's already been fulfilled.
Yeah. So this is a question I had after reading your book, and I don't remember if you addressed it specifically. And I'm going to take it a little bit. I'm going to stretch it further away from Jesus probably than.
Sure.
The book is titled Jesus Unexpected. So when I read the way that I've begun, and I've spent probably 6 months or so, Keith, like apocalyptic literature, not the word, obviously, is something I've been working through. For the bulk of this year, I tend to grab onto a topic and then I really wrestle with it, and I wrestle with nothing else until I feel like I'm in a better spot. The way I'm beginning to read the Old Testament prophets are they're writing to a Babylon or a Egypt or a military superpower that is hoarding wealth and abusing people and being prophesied against of. This is what happens when you do this, and the end of your age is coming. And so is it too much of a stretch to say, and I don't want to make this political, but I honestly feel like this book and your first book really go hand in hand, because often people use their end times theology to donate money to a church to then use that influence and power to influence politics and policies that the country happens to use, but especially in the world that we live in right now. But the way I read it is, when you act like Babylon, your end of the age comes. Like, this is what happens prophetically to people that do this to other people as a nation.
Yes.
Is that the wrong way to read the end times in the view of the way that you've lensed it in your book here?
No, I don't. I think that's actually one of the probably more helpful and healthy ways of looking at apocalyptic literature. So not looking at it specifically, like this particular detail, like, oh, there you go, like, these armored centaurs with the heads of women and tails of scorpions, those are Black Hawk helicopters. Like, no, stop, don't do that, don't do that. But now, like what you're saying, I think is, I think that actually is a healthier way to look at it. I think that if there's any benefit for us today, because again, these prophetic scriptures, these apocalyptic scriptures that we have in the Old and even in the New with Revelation and all the discourse, they're about destructions and the ends of empires that have already happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yet we are living in probably the largest empire, military might that's ever existed in the history of the planet. And so, yes, we can definitely look at those scriptures and say, look at them in sort of in a general sense and say, empires that ignore the poor, empires that build amass wealth for themselves, empires that are that lust after war and conflict, empires that get rich, plundering other nations and all that kind of stuff. Again, in general, those are the kinds of sins of these nations, right? That we see that end up, these destructions come upon them, that these empires end up crumbling and falling. And it is usually seen as sort of God's triumph over these man-made empires. In other words, the leaders of these empires think of themselves as gods. They have all this power, who can stand against me, and etc. And yet they fall and crumble, and that's what they do over and over and over again. And so that's why in Revelation, we have this very triumphant statement that as the empire, as the Babylon, as the Roman Empire, whoever it happens to be, as it falls, there's this declaration that the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of our God. And so every kingdom, every empire will fall, must fall, has to fall, so that Christ's kingdom is the only one left standing. And so again, I think if you do in general, just say, hey, as a rule of thumb, it's not good to be an empire who behaves this way. And maybe we should just be aware that every empire will fall. And these are, again, but not looking for some sort of specific thing on the calendar or like, oh, this event means something that's going to happen.
Yeah, your example for Black Hawk helicopters, I can't tell you how many times in my youth, not Black Hawks, but specific things were used as specific examples in that way. And I would always in the back go, I guess. Okay, I guess. Like, but I didn't know enough to say absolutely not. I just, okay, I guess. What am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
But so the Antichrist, and you talk a lot about this on the internet. You blogged about this, you've written about it here. When most people say Antichrist, they mean a thing, like a person, a being, a world emperor, a whatever adjective you want to apply there. What are you getting at when you use the word Antichrist?
Well, I'm getting at what I think the Bible says about it. So it's really simple. You could just go and look up the term Antichrist in, search it in a concordance or go online to Bible Gateway and look up the word, and you'll find it appears like twice in 1 John. Not in Revelation. Wow, what a shock, right? Not in this end times apocalyptic sort of language. So yeah, it has been something it's a term that really sort of Darby and end times futurists have sort of taken that title, that terminology, and applied it to a specific person and said, we are looking for an Antichrist. It's going to be this end times, sort of tyrant figure. But that's not the way it's used. I mean, Antichrist, John says that actually many Antichrists have come in, are already here, and he said that 2,000 years ago. So it just simply means, the way he defines it, is anyone who denies that Jesus is the Messiah, anyone that says Jesus is not the Messiah. And if you want to get really kind of technical, if we could interview John and say, John, who do you have in mind, any certain specific types of people when you talk about who are the kinds of people in your day and age who are persecuting Christians, but deny that Jesus is the Messiah? Well, it would either be the Jewish people that rejected Jesus as the Messiah and didn't believe that he was the Messiah, or the Romans, right? So, I mean, he probably had a very specific group of people in mind when he used that phrase, but he certainly didn't have any in mind any sort of, you know, future figure who was going to show up and have some sort of power and authority to, you know, deceive the nations or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you, yeah. So I'm struggling to put my words in order. So there was, and I haven't been to a lot of funerals, and I also recently lost my father. And at his funeral, I listened to family members, extended, not extended, insure with the funeral home. And this is probably far off topic, but I feel like it's related to the view on the rapture. That dad had to be facing a specific way. And are you certain that we delivered the coffin in a specific way? His head has to face this way. His feet needs to be facing this way, so that when the sun rises and Christ comes back with the morning, and he's, you know, he'll face to face, like that way they'll see each other face to face.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that at all? You didn't talk about that in your book, and I've only thought about it since the funeral, because I'd only been to a handful of funerals and I'd never been close enough to the actual ongoings to even hear people having that conversation. Have you ever heard that at all before? Is that a thing where it's like,
No, I have not. That is actually probably one of the more extreme things I've heard. And again, it's built on the assumption that there's going to be this rapture, and we're all going to pop out of our graves and meet Jesus in the sky, kind of a thing. I mean, I get it. If you believe that, then certainly, you know, you're going to do what you can. But at the same time, I don't. It's in some ways it just seems like, let's say you were facing the other way. I mean, so for a second you'd have to turn your head. I think it's okay. You're not gonna be left behind because you had to. Oh, I had to turn around, and by the time I did, I missed it. Like, oh darn.
Yeah.
But you know what I realized is that I really didn't answer your question. You had asked me sort of about this in the beginning there about the rapture, and I mentioned that it came from 1 Thessalonians 4:5, and I put a pin in it, but I never came back to it. So let me just address this, because again, there is a scripture that really does, because we've been told to read it this way, you know, tells us, like 1 Thessalonians 4, starting at verse 16, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. So, I mean, when you just take that out of context and read that just the way I did, it seems like, there you go, man. I mean, it's plain as day. It just tells you right there what's going to happen. The problem is, again, we've been sort of conditioned to read it that way. And for most of church history, Christians did not read it in that way. So here's something I point out in the book. So I spent some time explaining the Olivet Discourse, and how the Olivet Discourse that Jesus speaks is specifically about the destruction of that temple in Jerusalem in AD 70. So what I do in the book is I put side by side the parallels of 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5 and Matthew 24. And when you do, here's what you notice. These are phrases and terminology used both by Jesus in Matthew 24, when he's only talking about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and the same exact terminology used by Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5. And here's what you notice. Both of them talk about Christ's return from heaven with the angels, the sound of a trumpet, believers gathered together in the clouds, the timing unknown, coming like a thief, people unaware. It's compared to the birth pangs. Believers are urged to be sober, and there's warning against drunkenness. So when you put those side by side, it seems like they're both about the same exact event. Paul is not talking here about some other thing than Jesus is talking about. They're both talking about the same kind of thing. The challenges for us is that Paul is using a little bit more descriptive language, and he's using a slightly different metaphor to talk about the destruction of Jerusalem and the coming of Christ in that figurative way. And in this sense, N.T. Wright was very helpful to me, because N.T. Wright had a wonderful little um, commentary on this where he talks about that, Paul's description in 1 Thessalonians 4 is this, he uses this kind of language, but he's not at all intending to paint a left behind sort of rapture picture for us. What he's really doing is describing what people in that day would have understood was something very common, that when a king went away, either into battle or he visited another nation for some reason, that when he came back to his kingdom, the watchman on the wall would see him coming from a distance, tell everybody that, hey, here he comes, maybe blow a trumpet and say, hey, here he comes, and open the gate, and all the people would rush out to meet him along the road and cheer and, yay, he's back.
Mm-hmm.
And then welcome him in, and then they all follow him back into the city and close the door. That's the picture Paul is using when he describes this sort of coming of Jesus. Jesus is talking about the same thing. Paul's talking about the same thing. But Paul uses this other sort of metaphor to explain it. And because of that, we get confused. We're going to be caught up with him. We're going to meet him in the air. That's not a literal picture. It's not a literal idea.
So what are we to do with the resurrection then? Because that is a tentpole for Western evangelicalism.
Yeah, and that was probably, I'll be honest, probably the most difficult thing when writing this book to work out, because I do feel like the resurrection, I probably should just go in and let people know. I mean, this is sort of the big surprise in the book, because what I feel like in my studies is that when the scriptures talk about the coming of Christ, the return of Christ, that it's not describing a physical thing. It's not describing Jesus as a physical body coming and showing up again in the sky. That when we get those kind of descriptions, what it's actually talking about is, in other words, like that Christ is coming in us. In other words, I say that there's more of Christ in the world today than there was 2,000 years ago. This is why, in other words, this explains what Jesus means in John 14, when he tells the disciples, it's better for you if I go away. But see, now we've been through this Darbyization of thinking about things, and so we don't believe that. We think, oh no, Jesus, you're wrong. It's going to be so much better when you get back. But no, Jesus says, no, it's going to be so much better when I go away. Because if I go away, right, then the Pentecost happens, the Holy Spirit comes. Now the Spirit of God is poured out on all flesh. Now Christ abides and lives within every one of us. This is the promise of the new covenant fulfilled, that I will be your God and you will be my people, and every one of you will know me. Everyone can hear my voice. Everyone has a direct connection now with God through Christ. Jesus says, and again, in the same passage in John, he says, that if I go away, I'll prepare a place so that where I am, you can be also. So where is Christ right now? Well, he's not up there. He's here, right? We say that Christ is in us. He abides in us. We abide in him. Jesus says the Father and the Son will come and make their home in you. And so it's in this sense. In fact, this whole idea of, the coming of Christ, the phrase used in the New Testament is parousia, which means the presence. It's the presence of Christ. And so that's one of the major things I'm arguing for in the book. And I understand it's a stretch for many people. I call it the slow motion second coming of Christ, that one at a time, as each person has Christ come alive in them and they abide in Christ, there is more and more and more of Christ in the world. And in this way, we are his hands, we are his feet, we are the body of Christ in the world today. And so that's the plan. It's in this way that Christ comes and continues to come and keeps coming, like that little pinch of yeast that fills the whole lump of dough, like that little tiny seed that first has to go into the ground and die, so that now it can bear much fruit and then becomes like the mustard seed that covers, the earth. This is the picture we have. This is the plan that we have. So if that's the understanding, if that is right, then again, the question is, well, what about this resurrection that we're supposed to experience? So I point out in the book, and I go through, I think, pretty systematically, the different times that Paul speaks of this idea of the resurrection, and also John in Revelation, when he speaks of the resurrection, and point out that this resurrection is something that Paul says we have already been raised with Christ. So we have already experienced what they call the first resurrection, because we were dead in our sins. When Christ died, all of us died. And when he was raised, all of us were raised. And so, he says in Ephesians, we have all been raised with Christ and we are sitting with him in heavenly places. This is the first resurrection. So in that sense, everyone who is in Christ, everyone who is abiding in Christ and Christ abides in you, you are right now, you have experienced the first resurrection. The second resurrection is the one that we will all experience when we physically die. And then when you will open your eyes and you will then be face to face with Jesus in newness of life. This is how, Jesus has overcome the grave and death has lost its sting, because now when we die, we are transported into his presence and we live with him for eternity. And that would be the second resurrection. And so that's my understanding of the term resurrection. That's what I think is actually being told to us in the New Testament.
Yeah. Side question that I thought of a moment ago, and I want to go back to Darby and Schofield. So there have been measurable people that benefit from when we put the word homosexuality in the Bible, and other translations of the Bible or influences or versions. There are people that benefit from those. What does Schofield stand to benefit, or what's the reasoning there? Like, there has to be a reason that Schofield would attach a name like Darby to a Bible. Like, what is the interplay there? Like, who gains in this?
Right. Well, I think early on, what happened was, I don't know if you know who Bill Witherington is, but he does a wonderful job, I think, of explaining that. Oh, he's great. He's a Bible scholar. There's a video on YouTube I watched of him explaining this. The original benefit about here's the thing about this whole dispensational movement. If we go back to 1830 when Darby first came up with it, right? It did not sell well, did not go over well immediately in England, which is where he was from. Mm-hmm. He came to America and he began preaching this to American audiences, and they ate it up with a spoon. They loved it. And so it was a very popular movement among just the people, on the pews. They loved the story. It just got them excited. They wanted to hear more about it. They got excited about it. This is when, it's sort of like, well, hey, in other words, this sells. Let's put it in a book. Let's put it in, let's make a version of the Bible with Darby's notes in it, and we'll sell a lot of Bibles. And now here's the other kind of way that it was sort of a backwards movement, the way it formed. So then it gained so much popularity among the average person, the people in the pews, that all of a sudden they said, and this is exactly what Ben Witherington points out. He says that literally what happened was it was so popular that people began to say, wouldn't it be great if we had some sort of scholarship, to kind of back this up? Like, what if there was like a Bible college, or I don't know, maybe a seminary that would kind of legitimize this, where we could like pump out some ordained pastors who had been trained, and they would preach this stuff, because right now the only people preaching it is this guy Darby and some other people that think it's kind of fun. So that's kind of exactly what happened. This is where we get Dallas Bible Theological Seminary and D.L. Moody and Moody Institute and things like this. It's like, let's do that. Let's create an organization that will create pastors that are ordained and licensed, that will now go and preach in churches and now have sort of credentials behind them. So when you say, like, what does someone have to gain? I mean, to this day, this kind of end times prophecy stuff is a huge moneymaker. Hagee sold millions of copies of his Blood Moons book. Hal Lindsey sold millions of copies of Late Great Planet Earth. Left Behind series, the reason why they kept making them is because they make lots and lots of money. And here's, I got to tell you this. This is the first time I experienced the hype around this topic. I don't normally talk about these kind of things, right? So about, I guess like 6 or 7 years ago, whenever it was that John Hagee had his Blood Moons prophecy book, right? So I looked into it a little bit and I just thought, this is nonsense. And I wrote a blog post where I debunked the whole thing. And the first time I'd ever really done anything on that topic. And at the time, I probably would get on a good blog post, like every week, I might get 600 or 700 hits on a post if it was like really good. Maybe 1,000 if it was like super good. I published that refutation of John Hagee's Blood Moon thing, and I got like 30,000 hits. and it blew my mind. I went to go check, and it was just like this spike, and I've got the bar graph, and it's like, woohoo! Like, oh my gosh, what? And it's only because people are Googling blood moon prophecy, and my thing pops up, and ba-boom, I got these hits. And I'll be honest, I got a rush. I was like, man, maybe I should write another one.
It sells.
People love this stuff, right? I wasn't making any money, but it was like, you just couldn't believe the appetite for this thing. And this is the thing that drives me crazy, Seth. What all of these guys have in common, what all of these end times Bible, prophecy guys have in common is this: they're wrong 100% of the time. Everything they predicted and prophesied, they've been wrong, right? Hal Lindsey was wrong. Jesus, the 80s were not the last decade, of mankind on earth, which is what he said. Gorbachev was not the Antichrist. And I've seen these books like over and over and over again. All these things they prophesied. Nope, they've been wrong. And here's a crazy thing. In spite of the fact they've all been wrong, any one of those guys could publish a book tomorrow about the end times and sell a million copies.
Yeah, bestseller. Yeah.
It doesn't hurt their popularity at all.
Yeah.
So we just have this incredible appetite for this thing.
So hearing you describe the foundation of seminaries and training up pastors to basically preach this based upon eisegesis is what it sounds like. Like, this is the way we read scripture. We need you to train people to read it this way. Yeah. But then I so often get told that that's what I'm doing when I try to go back to the earlier church fathers. Like, no, this is the way this is kind of the context that it was written to, and these are the people that it was written to, and here's what was happening in the year 100, and they're like, no, you're making it say what you wanted to say. I'm like, am I though? And I had never really thought about the end times that way, but to hear you describe it that way, that's what it feels like systematic eisegesis, 200 years removed, that's now become gospel, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I'm someone called me this, in a good way. I did a debate a while back, and the guy in the debate kept calling me a progressive. I'm a progressive Christian, and I'm like, I don't consider myself a progressive. And one of the guys in the comments said, Keith, I think you're actually a regressive Christian, because what you're wanting to do is to take us back to the early Christians, the early church. And I'm like, that's it. I need to trademark that. I am a regressive Christian. I want to take the church. That's really honestly a lot of what I've been doing. So much of what I feel like the church has gotten off track, and I can pretty much put my finger on it. It was right around the time of Constantine. And that was pretty much when we started getting off the track of Jesus. And so, almost all of my books, I'm quoting Irenaeus and Tertullian and Origen, and because I feel like these guys had an unfiltered view of Jesus and the gospel. And many of them were, either trained by one of the apostles or trained by someone who was trained by one of the apostles. And so, I feel like we've gotten way, way off track with a lot of our theology. And I think you're kind of like me, I guess. You're a regressive Christian.
Depending on the topic, again, because I don't know what I'm studying. Although I've become, I guess, wise enough when people ask me a question, I'm like, I don't know. I haven't studied that. I really don't know. You should look at this, and this, because I just don't know. Right. And I know how much I thought I knew about the topics that I've ripped apart. And I'm not going to say I don't know anymore. I'm not going to say I know anymore unless I really feel like I can adequately say what, anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it well, but.
No, but you're right. I think that's a good discipline we all should have. Even when we've studied, and even you should say, I think I know.
Yeah, Dunning-Kruger is my middle name.
Yeah, I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably twice today. So you referenced earlier that you're giving away something into the book, but I want to say this for people that haven't read the book. So we didn't talk about Daniel 7 hardly at all. Josephus, you've got words like Flavius and a bunch of other stuff in this book that we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about the temple and how you and I are that. Like, there's so many of the things that we don't have time to talk about. So don't hear Keith say that and then think that you get off the hook with not going, because you should get the book. And there is much more that we have not, and we won't be able to be talking about. I want to ask you the same question I've asked everyone this year, Keith. So when you say this is what God is, like you're trying to wrap words around the concept of God, how do you, like, what do you say to that when someone's like, Keith, what like, for real, what is, when you say God, what do you mean?
That is wonderful. Great question. Well, I'll just say the definition keeps expanding, you know? So, I mean, in general, I think when I think of God, initially, I think of God as sort of an Abba. I feel like, Jesus gave us this beautiful picture of God as a loving father. So definitely that's how I see God. Um, but in my studies, in the book not this book so much as the book I'm just finished writing. I've started to, and I'll just go and call him out. Baxter Kruger blew my mind. Um, he just put out this little PDF called The Mediation of Christ, which is phenomenal. It's free. You can download it. You Google it and download it. It's just amazing. It's about, I don't know, it's long. It's not an easy read, but it's worth reading. And I think what he points out, it's like, I don't know, I just feel like more and more God is better than I think he is. You know what I mean? Like I keep discovering more things about God, and I have to stop and say, wow, God, you're better than I thought you were. Like that happened to me when I read Brad Jerzak's book, Her Gates Will Not Be Shut.
Second person today that has
Yeah.
used that book in a
Yeah.
conversation. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I was reading that book riding the train to work, and I was crying, sitting on the train, weeping, and just like, oh God, you're better than I thought you were. And I feel like it's happened again, like reading Baxter Kruger's thing. It's like I'm just kind of imagining and trying to wrap my brain around the goodness of God, the greatness of God, the love of God, the mercy of God. It's bigger and more amazing than I thought it was. And the more I know God, the more I draw near to Him and experience Him. I'm just constantly being amazed that He's better than I thought He was.
Yeah, I like that. Where do people go, Keith? You got 97 podcasts, 8,000 books. Like, where do you want people to go to dig into your things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't have that many. I have the Heretic Happy Hour podcast.
I was using apocalyptic hyperbole.
Oh, there you go. But I'll say the podcast is not for everybody. I mean, a lot of people are offended. There's some language there, and we get into some weird topics.
It says explicit in iTunes, though, so I
does.
feel like that's on you if you didn't see that.
Yeah. But I mean, if you want to connect with me, like I blog at Pathos. That you can just find that at keithgiles.com. I'm on Facebook and Twitter. I'm pretty responsive there. My books are on Amazon. The whole Jesus Un series is on Amazon in print and audio and Kindle. So yeah, those are probably the main places you can connect with me.
Good. Thank you again for your time tonight, Keith. Always a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot, Seth. It's been fun.
Out in that there.